stimulate us all to have lots of very meaningful exchanges, and for you to express your views and your heartfelt commitments to making a better world. So I hope this will be stimulating in that way. I'm still very involved in interfaith things where I live. I live down on the south coast, and both there and in the southeast of England, I get involved in interreligious things. And really, the inspiration for me to do that was through the work of Father and Mother Moon, really, because although they're people of their own very particular religious convictions, they've given so much energy to bringing people together beyond difference. And as I think was already expressed this morning when I was here, when you were having your morning session before breakfast, it's very important for us to think about the things that we share in common. Of course, we are different from one another on many levels, but some very fundamentally good things we share in common. So this presentation is to try and stimulate thought about some of the points that Robin raised in our 5 principles, and just to go a little bit deeper. But if I give a bit of explanation here, I hope it will provoke you to come up with many thoughts of your own, which we'll also share, because I hope I've got a lot longer than I need to go through the slides, so there'll be plenty of time for you as well. Maybe some of you, probably this was already mentioned, some of you are aware of the work of UPF and allied organisations in trying to bring religious thought together. Of course, nobody who's committed to a particular faith wants to just amalgamate it with everybody else's and make it all the same. That's not the point, because we've come to God through our own God-given path, really, and that's very dear to us. But when we're strong and secure in it, then we can meet others and seek to understand others. And even if there's a different appearance, a different dress, a different way of worship, still we find something profoundly in common. I had in a lifetime of many experiences. I spent a year in India working for an NGO, mainly based in Delhi, and particularly had an opportunity to outreach to a lot of religious leaders. And although their faiths and their dress and their way of approaching God was different, when I met some of the most impassioned leadership, I really felt a lot in common between them all. And probably you've had that experience. I hope you have.
We've got big multi-faith chaplaincy.
Yeah, when you sit down together and you talk about your faith experiences and your life experiences, you'll find that there's a lot of similarity in people who are really trying to lead a life for God and other people, and to do something that's pleasing to God and in service to others, despite the fact they come from a different religious tradition. There's a lot of commonality there. So it's with that sort of thinking that I'd like to look at this together now. So what do we have in common? There's a few different images there. Lots of it. There could be a picture of us there, right? Because we look all very different from one another. But what is it that we have in common? Now, of course, Margaret just emphasised earlier on that actually not everybody in today's world is a believer. Certainly in our part of the world. Probably if you look at the world at large, the vast majority of people are believers and do have a religious tradition. But in our Western world, there are a lot of people who don't have any convictions now. But anyway, it would be somehow our point that we do have a common origin. And as people of faith, of course, we would see that common origin as God and God. Or the ultimate reality. Some people might have a personalized view of God, or they might have a view of a humanistic view, if you like, a view that there's goodness in people, or that there's a moral standard, or something like this. And this type of perception, as Robin was mentioning, that the place which our value comes from is actually our spiritual nature and our moral nature. And however beautiful we may be, or however materially wealthy we may be, the solution as well when we think about peace in the world is not from those things alone. It's really from the beauty of human character, nature. And in our own ways, in our own traditions, how can we make ourselves better people is ultimately the key to it all. Because no matter how many wonderful organizations we have, if we don't have better people who are able to maintain a standard of goodness, then of course we'll not succeed. I think you're all very aware that sadly it's often the case when we get a lot of power or a lot of money that somehow sadly things go astray. And people end up behaving very differently from their highest principles. So, anyhow, we have a common origin, and our slogan coined by Father Moon is "One family under God." But how can we know about our common origin? How can we discover about God? Well, of course, there's the scriptural study, and that's why it's very fascinating to look at a volume like this, which is an anthology of sacred texts. So, if you have a look in here, you'll find your faith, be it anything from, the major faiths, also the many minor faiths. There are things from traditional African thought, traditional North American Indian thought. There's all sorts of different scriptural origins. It's very interesting to look at. So that's certainly been one very important way. And usually in the history of any particular faith, there's been someone who's received revelation or received a particularly profound insight and founded something. And then through discipleship, many other people found God and the core of their own being in their own way. But those great scriptures and those philosophical insights have been a very important way to understand God and through that to understand life. But also, of course, there's one way that our common origin, God, the Creator, expresses itself is actually through the natural world. So that's one way we're going to sort of find a common avenue together in the things that I'm going to explain now. So I'm just going to point out some things in a sense that we can learn about the Creator. I've interspersed now and again some scriptural quotations from different faiths. You're always in danger, of course, when you're in front of an audience of missing out somebody's particular...
That's the one, yeah.
So I will hope I'm not going to be doing that with you. Anyhow, this is just a passage from the New Testament, from St. Paul, basically expressing that we don't have an excuse for not knowing God, because God's eternal power and His deity, they've been there to be seen in the creation of the created world. I think that is something common in many, all down human history, in human beings' search for the divine. That's we stand in awe of nature. You just got to sit on that table at the back there and look out the window.
So gorgeous.
And it's just stunning. It's just stunning. But of course, this is a quote from the Quran. There is no God but He, the living, self-subsisting, eternal. No slumber can seize Him nor sleep. His are all things in the heavens and on the earth. Interesting one here from Sikhism as well. He is the sole supreme being of eternal manifestation, creator, immanent reality, without fear, without rancor, timeless form, unincarnate, self-existent. So anyhow, in all these great scriptures, there's a desire to find out about God. But in many of them, there's also a testimony to God as the origin, as the creator. So UPF's principles, we look at some things that we find universally present in the natural world. And through that, we derive principles which can help us to think about how we can build peace. And also later on, we're going to look at that this afternoon, what brings disharmony, what brings antagonism and fighting and conflict and those sorts of issues as well. that can provide an insight there as well. Anyhow, just as we know an artist through his painting, I put the clue at the bottom there. I usually ask people who painted that one. Of course, anyhow, it was Renoir. And usually, if you have some insight into art, you may see a painting, you may not see the name written on the bottom of it, but if it's something very famous, like for example Renoir, there's a particular style, a mode of expression that you'll recognise in common. And here's another great artist. Oh, what happened? Sorry, I lost something there. Oh, I beg your pardon. There's another picture supposed to come up there. This is the great picture from Michelangelo
Sistine Chapel.
of God's creation of Adam. I don't know what happened to that. I beg your pardon.
It's lovely, isn't it?
Anyhow, what I wanted to express is, if we think about it in this way, then you might not have met Renoir, but you can know about him through his painting. Or if you think about literature as well, if you think about music, you can know something of the creator through the creation. And it's quite interesting sometimes to examine people's biography in relationship to the poetry they write, the literature they write, the music they write. And you'll find that many times there's something in their personal history that provoked them at that moment in time to express in that way. So in other words, by looking at what's created, you can know the creator. So in that sense, we're saying we can know something about God by looking at the world in which we live. So here's some different images of the fact that our world is made up of what you might call a pair system. And of course you can look at things in different ways, and maybe somehow also your life experience or your own pains and hurts might sometimes lead you to look at things in a different way. And some people look at the world around them and see conflict and struggle for survival and all this sort of aspect. And that's an interesting thing to examine. But what we're looking at here is the fact that wherever you look, be it in male and female in human experience, or be it male and female in the animal world, or be it stamen and pistil, or male and female in that sense in plant life, or be it in the wider universe where you have positive and negative elements interacting with one another, then our world is made up of complementary pairs. And in this sense of complementary pairs, it's not things which are in conflict with one another. Rather, they're things which are absolutely essential to each other's existence and the recognition of the other. And when you don't get that right, of course things don't work well. But of course in nature, fundamentally things are running very well. But if you think about human life, for example, if we get it wrong in the relationship between men and women, for example, then obviously that has huge implications. And we know a lot about the fact that in history that's not always run very well, for example. Of course, this is looking at difference in these very particular senses, and I'm going to go into a little bit more detail in a moment, but seeing difference as being something which is complementary, where actually each one benefits the other. So of course, for when Father Moon shares about this type of content, he's always explaining, well, what would be the meaning of men if there were no women? What would be the meaning of women if there were no men? Because we wouldn't be here very much longer. So there's a vital necessity to recognize that actually your value is not derived from yourself, but it's derived through how you give of yourself in the relationship to your counterpart in any circumstance, and how well you do that. So that's sort of what we're going to explore here when thinking about pairs. So this pair system is present regardless of where you look then. So we just saw those images, but you've got male and female in human existence. If you think of these as different sort of strata or levels of existence, and in the animal world, of course, again male and female. In the plant world, again male and female, but expressed through stamen and pistil. And then when you look at inanimate things, those three are all living things. If you look at inanimate things, even there you've got, in molecular structures, you've got the anion and the cation, you've got the electron and the proton. You've got this interplay of different elements which complement each other and combine together to create something greater than they were standing alone. And of course, basically in that natural world, these things interact very successfully, very harmoniously. But what can we draw from this? Because obviously the big struggle when it comes to building peace is how to create that type of respectful, complementary relationship, and not perceiving difference as a reason for, fear and mistrust and misconduct, but rather how to relate to one another in a productive way. Whilst that's true in the sense of male and female at that level of existence, and we could explore this much more, we probably won't have time over this weekend, there's another level also of a pair system, if you like. So it's looking at these same strata of existence, but looking at a different sort of dimension. So just as we've got male and female, it's very important to bring men and women together in the right way. So if you think about individual development, there's also two aspects to existence. Some people might talk about more than two, but here we're talking about basically the mind or the spiritual aspect and the body or the material aspect. So it's also very important how you bring these two together. And later on, when we examine discovering individual peace, we're going to particularly examine the fact it's very important how you bring your thoughts and your deeds together.
That's right.
And that your thoughts and deeds harmonise. And of course, very nice of Margaret to talk about me as a person of integrity, but I might have some moments where that lapsed. But what is it that is the essence of integrity? Is that your higher mind is properly expressed in your higher conduct.
That's right.
If you have lovely, lovely thoughts or great philosophy or marvellous political beliefs, but actually you conduct yourself secretly or corruptly or whatever, contrary to those beliefs, and they're not in harmony with one another, that's a major problem. So when we come later on to look about peace within the individual, this will be very important. But it's not even only true in human existence, but even in animal existence, of course. Maybe we don't see the same capacities of mind, but there's no doubt about it, an animal isn't just a body. An animal has an intelligence, a nature which is directing its behaviour and its conduct. And even if you think about plant life, science talks about the plant mind and the fact that there is something directing the conduct of the plant. So, it grows towards the light, its roots seek out the water, and it's just an absolute miracle how that tiny seed holds within it the capacity to develop itself into, the huge tree or the fruit-producing, plant or whatever. So it's extraordinary. But even if we think about inanimate life, things that, unlike plants, animals, and humans, don't have life, there is clearly some directive nature, some inherent directive nature that is governing the conduct. And in a sense, that's the essence of the scientific examination, isn't it? Science is always looking for pattern and always looking for something that can be discovered that explains the conduct. In other words, some sort of principle, some sort of rule, something that's in operation. So everything that exists also has this set of complementary pairs as well. And we'll look at that more, as I said, when we think about finding individual peace. And when we think about going back to the other one, when we look at finding family peace in human existence, of course, a prerequisite for harmony between men and women. I mean, if you're looking for a nice husband, of course it matters if he's handsome or maybe, has some other obvious talent. But the most important thing in the end is that person's, capacity to live for other people's sake, that person's capacity to be trustworthy, reliable. These sorts of qualities, inner qualities, are very, very important. So it's a prerequisite for family peace, in a sense, to have some quality of peace or integrity within the individual. Because if you get two people who are not able to keep what they say, on many different levels, I don't mean just being on time or something, but in terms of, in every religion you usually have a ceremony where you commit yourselves to one another, right? And it's a very serious ceremony, you know, some sort of marriage type of ceremony. And usually it's in front of the community, it's in front of God, it's in front of your family. And what you say to one another is very, very important. But of course the key issue is,
Will you do it?
can you keep it? And that's very, very, very demanding, right? So I just heard about 50th wedding anniversary celebration
Of Sam and our son.
this year. So,
Amazing.
you know, but that's not easy stuff, is it? And particularly in a world now where we find people with, you know, individual economic freedom and so on.
Yeah.
People find it very difficult to hold this together. So the prerequisite for family level peace is actually having peace within yourself and integrity and so on. So we're going to examine that more later. But so these two sets of pair systems are integrated. But I just wanted to point out, in any sort of successful collaboration, and nature which God created is full of such collaboration. That's the essence of its being. Because all energy is actually generated through this type of relationship. But always in those relationships, you have one element which is in the giving position, and one element which is in the receiving and responding position. And it's through good giving and good responding that actually things can develop and goodness can emerge out of it, and harmony and growth and development and so on. And, you know, for example, the mind should be in the subjective position over the body. So it's very important you have the right relationship with one another. So most moral teaching is about what? It's about empowering the mind to control the body.
Absolutely.
And some of the most gross human misconduct is where the body is overpowering the mind, right? What do I mean? I mean things like sexual misconduct, for example. When people exploit others because of their bodily desire and they can't control their body with their mind. So they're not able to keep the moral code of their faith or their religion, for example. Or it could be also in terms of, you know, as Robin was talking about the hierarchy of needs and Maslow. So yes, you need food, I need food. You need a nice warm place to live, I need a nice warm place to live. But when that goes beyond what is my need into greed and, you know, envy and striving against others to steal and take from them, then actually that's not working anymore. So to make this work well, we need a good relationship between subject and object. So the mind should be the subject and the body should respond to the mind. Now, of course, that doesn't mean the body doesn't matter. Or even in some religious insights, almost the sense is the body is evil. You know, and you have to control. But as long as the body is under the direction of a good mind, then the mind has to pay attention to the body. So the mind can't completely ignore the body.
No.
I was just listening to an interview from Jonah Alum, the New Zealand rugby player, who just died last week, 40 years old. And you know, he had a very serious kidney problem. And even when he was playing rugby for the All Blacks, very, very physical, he didn't tell anybody. He didn't tell the people who were managing the team or the trainers about his problem. But actually he had a very, very serious problem. And the interviewer in this, I was listening to the World Service driving here at 5 o'clock in the morning. And you know, there was this interview with him. And the interviewer was asking, surely at some point it became necessary for you to explain. Because actually, sometimes he just couldn't perform. And his trainer was saying how...
What's wrong with you, yeah?
Anyhow, in other words, because the mind is in the subject position and the body's in the object position, it doesn't mean that the mind doesn't respect the body. So there's a giving and a responsive side. And that they take their proper role with one another is very important. And of course also those roles are not always fixed. There are some points where the body has to be listened to, you know, where if it's to do with some serious health issue, or even if it's just a matter of having to go to the toilet, you know, or having to eat something, or whatever. But in essence, the right relationship between the two is important. Or if you think about another subject-object position, you've got the teacher and you've got the pupil. Well, how good the relationship is between the teacher and pupil is very important. Clearly, the teacher's in the subject position and is imparting the knowledge. And it's very important how the student is trying to learn and trying to understand, and that there's a very good harmony between teacher and pupil. So anybody who's been involved in the teaching profession in this part of the world in recent times, there's often a struggle, because a lot of time and energy is spent on discipline and trying to get the right focus and the right attention. So to make the pair system work, you need good giving, receiving, responding going on between the two sides. And what's the essence to that? The essence to that is the type of motivation to have good give and take, or good interaction, or very positive relationships. What's very, very important is that those relationships are centered on a higher purpose. So in other words, if the teacher is teaching primarily for the sake of the income they're receiving, and to impress someone that they should get more money or whatever, that's not really, in essence, the right motivation. Of course, there should be recompense for your work, but the motivation should be for the sake of the child, and even not just for the sake of the child, beyond the sake of the child, for the sake of the society, for the sake of the betterment of the nation. Because the quality of education that's going on, the way that you can bring out the best in someone, there lies the whole future, right? So
Absolutely.
generally speaking, it's regarded as an honourable profession, right? Because you're investing yourself and it's affecting the future of the nation. So to have good interaction between teacher and pupil, then it should be centering on the higher purpose. So both the teacher and the pupil, usually the pupil gets it from the teacher, should have a motivation to be the best I can be, not just for my benefit, but actually for the sake of the whole society. Ultimately, if you have a religious motivation, for the sake of God, for the sake of family, parents, and so on and so on and so on. Similarly, if you think about the interaction within the human body between all the different organs and between the different systems, the respiratory system or the digestive system, there's a lot of interactions going on in the physical body, right? And in order for those physical interactions to work well, they have a common center. What's that common center? It's all coordinated with the purpose to maintain a good relationship and to maintain the well-being and the health of the body as a whole. So no one part should be taken away from another. And fundamentally, when we are in good health, then that's the way it's working. So having higher purposes, so good interaction between the subject and the object, and having a higher purpose. So I put that together in this little diagram here. So the motivation for someone to relate to another person, or for someone to relate to something, should be springing from their relationship to the higher purpose. So as I said, for many people this is rooted in the inspiration they get from the moral teaching within their religious conviction. But for some people it might not be specific to a personal God, it might just be a moral sense or a set of principles. Or even if we think about national law, fundamentally what's national law about? It's about trying to set a standard which if we all followed it, everybody would benefit from. I was just thinking this morning when Patricia was talking about forgiveness as opposed to revenge. I was just thinking about the beginnings of legal systems. And you think back, for example, in the Judeo-Christian tradition, I'm sure it's the case in other traditions, maybe you could tell us also from Sikhism, there was always a tendency for people, when something bad's done to you, you just seek vengeance. You're struck, so you want to strike back.
Eye for an eye.
Yeah, but then the whole point of the emergence of a legal system in the Old Testament time, which was eye for eye, tooth for tooth, stripe for stripe, life for life, was that whole situation was taken out of the hands of the offender and the offended and put in the hands of the judge. Because that's the benefit of the legal system, isn't it? The legal system removes the opportunity for just taking vengeance, but someone who's not been offended, who's applying the principles to the circumstance, makes the judgment and decides what the punishment should be, or what the way of paying, in a sense, some recompense for misconduct should be. So that, that's very, very important. So in order to have good relationship here, you need to have some sense of higher purpose which you hold in common. So ideally the teacher is teaching, yes, for the sake of the child, but also for the sake of the benefit of all humanity, the benefit of the nation, the benefit of the society. And hopefully something can be imparted to the young person so they also have that type of aspiration. So the aspiration is not just, I want to get as many qualifications as I possibly have so I can get a £65,000 a year job and be rich and lord it over others. And that shouldn't be the motivation. There should be an inspiration that imparts, that encourages the student to think about the higher purpose. And then through a good relationship between this person and God or the higher purpose, then the motivation to relate to this person is not for my own sake, but you're recognizing that this is my God-given partner, and I'm relating for the sake of this person out of my respect for God and my appreciation of a higher set of values. So it's a very simple idea, but there's a lot of things we can check ourselves on. In all that we do, all day long, what are we engaged in? We're engaged in relationships. Between my mind and my body, between me and my wife, between me and my employees, or me and my boss, or whatever it is. And the thing we have to check ourselves against is how we apply the moral code that we believe is really important, or how am I demonstrating my love for God in my love for other people, and the type of motivation that lies behind me engaging in a relationship. So when you engage in a relationship in that fashion, then actually the result of the relationship, the union between the subject and object partner, brings about development and brings about the realization of the higher purpose. So in a sense, the meeting place between the two partners in the interaction is this place here. What's this place here? This is the purpose of God, or if you like, the place where they meet through which they fulfill the higher purpose and bring it into reality. In other words, a good result emerges. So, centering on a higher purpose, interact with each other, living for the sake of the higher purpose and therefore for the sake of each other, and then a good result is coming out. Peace or happiness is emerging from it. It's very, very simple, and fortunately, God has created in great diversity. We have the pair system of male and female. We have the pair system of mind and body. We have the different types of character, the racial differences, the different talents, and all these different things. What do they enable us to do? They enable us to interact with one another, centering on a higher purpose, to bring about good things. So, this is just provoking us all to think. The reason life isn't working very well is I'm not connected enough to the higher purpose. I'm not governing my own conduct according to that higher purpose, and therefore I'm not able to substantiate it. If in human society we were able to substantiate this type of interaction the way that it is in nature, we would see a lot of development, and we'd see a lot of goodness resulting from it. So later on, when we look at where's the source of conflict, we'll have some things to reflect on in relationship with that. Okay. So of course this is there on many different levels, and there's thousands upon thousands of examples, but here are just some important ones. How good is the relationship between my mind and my body? How much is my mind connected to God and higher morality such that my conscience doesn't even permit me to do what I could do? No one's watching, and I'm in an important position, and no one would say anything against me.
Nobody will see me.
But actually, I've abused my position, because I'm Jimmy Savile or whatever it was, and I had a lot of power and influence and fame, and then I could do things and get away with it, and I got away with it so many times that, you know, although originally surely there was some sense of conscience there, or some fear of getting caught, in the end, you know, it's not having any influence at all anymore. And you're actually using your position to exploit other people. So, good relationship between husband and wife, between parent and child, between government and people, human beings and the environment, could all be based on this very simple understanding. So what does it mean then? It means we need to, you know, we need to educate. The UPF is very into what it calls character education.
Yeah.
What does that mean? It's very into education, not just in terms of knowledge or just in terms of practical skill, but elevating the human mind so we have a very profound appreciation of what is goodness and what is moral and what is the right way to live. And we feel really inspired to live for the sake of others. We feel so happy if we've done something that benefited another person and took them out of their difficulty and their misery. That's really, really exciting. That's much more exciting than having my second Aston Martin, or whatever it is, my Rolls Royce, or my yacht as well as my big car, or whatever it is. It's not. That's not so inspirational. And this type of quality, that's what I talked about when I was in Delhi for that year, and I was visiting the Hindu leader and the Sikh leader and the Muslim leader and Christian leaders. Then the thing that was in common, because they were very, very high integrity people, was this type of hope and ambition for humanity, and this trying to bring harmony and goodness and development within their own community, inspired by these sorts of ideas. So it's very, very important. So I'm going to conclude with a section thinking about finding peace on different levels. So first of all, I'm going to talk a bit, before we have a break, about individual peace. Before we have your question and answers before lunch. So if we're going to find lasting peace and happiness in our world, surely, definitely, we need to increase the peace that people have within their own selves. Because that's the starting point. And from there, if you don't have peace in yourself, it would not be surprising that in your interaction with others, even unknowingly, even unintentionally, even unwittingly, you're doing things to other people. I just was reading the other day a book on ministry by I can't remember his name now, but a clergyman from Birmingham.
Really?
And he was writing about, he'd been probably 30, 40 years in ministry. And then he completely lost his, couldn't continue. And also his health went at the same time. And he went into a very profound period of reflection.
Is that Donald E?
I can't remember the name. I must look it up for you. But it was a book. I was clearing up my house to move, and looking through books and deciding what to throw away, what to keep, and what to give to the charity shop and so on. And I came across this book which I got at some event that I never read. And I was just reading it, and this man, many, many years in the ministry, grew his church really successfully. But then he got into a struggle in himself, and his health went, and he was reflecting. And he suddenly realized, actually, when I look back at it now, part of my motivation for doing what I did was my own need for recognition and value. The things I did were not all completely for the sake of God and other people. Part of it was because I needed to be. And I started to read one chapter, and in this chapter, he talked about having a mistress.
What?
In other words, he had a wife, he's also someone married, I think, by that time for 40 years.
Oh my
He talked about having a mistress. But as I progressed through the chapter, I realized he wasn't talking about another lady. His mistress had been his job in the church.
Oh.
Because he got so much from it
That he ignored the wife.
Forgetting some of his other obligations in the sense of, because he talked about his own childhood, his own upbringing, and his own insecurities and difficulties, which meant he needed a confirmation of his own value. So this was mixed in, unknowingly, with his, do you understand?
I understand completely.
And these sorts of things, we're all
guilty of.
all have things like this going on. So I want to talk about individual peace, and this we'll do before lunch. But then, of course, there's not just individual peace, there's the expansion of that to peace in society. And this afternoon we'll talk about that centering on the family. So how does my individual peace become expanded? Through the way that I conduct myself within my family. How does that work in terms of love between husband and wife, love between parents and children, centering on a love for God and a commitment to higher values? So that we'll look at this afternoon. And also we mentioned, I won't go at such great length, although it is a huge
It's
topic.
very important.
But we'll also talk about universal peace in the sense of good human beings, good individuals living in a good society, and how such people actually interact with this incredible gift from God, this amazing natural world which has so much potential for goodness but requires respectful interaction. We should, just as we shouldn't be thieves to one another, so also we shouldn't be thieves towards the natural world. We have to really, we might say we're the subject and the world is the object, but actually you have to live for the sake of nature, not just exploit it. So we're going to look at that a little bit as well. So these are 3 different levels of peace, which is an interesting approach.
Yeah, very.
Peace in myself as a foundation to peace in society, which is rooted in peace in the family, and then peace in the universe, peace that goes beyond just interpersonal human relationships, but the relationship between man and the natural world, and the fact that we regard things as not my possessions, but actually the gift of God, which belongs to all humanity and to all future generations, and thus I can't just use it the way I'd like to for myself. So the highest religious traditions teach this type of amazing truths, don't they, Richard? Which is not the normal level of human consciousness.
No.
So, when those first religious teachers had their first disciples, when they first began to explain these things, for most of the disciples it was very strange, very difficult to really understand. So different from the ways we think. Okay, so that's all 3 together. So to have a peaceful world, the suggestion is we need individual peace, peace in the family, and therefore in society, the wider world of human relationship, and then peace in the relationship between human beings and nature. So to examine then individual peace on a bit more profound level. Just a few quotations first of all, and this is about basically our longing for God, our search for higher purpose, our search for higher values. Put poetically in the Psalms, in the biblical account, as the deer longs for flowing streams, so my soul longs for God. Or from Islam, the greatest bliss is the good pleasure of God. That is supreme felicity. It's just a fancy way of saying happiness. The greatest happiness is that you have pleased God. And when people have a profound religious understanding, then they do feel like that. And this is something from Buddhism. Every being has the Buddha nature. This is the self, the Tathagata, that shows all beings the storehouse of enlightenment. What is that? That's their Buddha nature. It's suggesting everybody has within them a godliness in resemblance to the Buddha. And you have to find it, you have to discover it. Or again from Aristotle, this is from Greek thought, not directly to do with the personal God view, but the virtues are acquired by first having actually practiced them.
Absolutely.
We must become just by doing just acts. Become temperate by doing temperate acts. Become brave by doing brave acts. And again, of course, this is not confined to Aristotle's wisdom. Again, this is present in the great religious traditions. So, however much you pray to God and you accept that something's right, if you don't actually practice it, you remain very distant from it in reality. It's beautiful words, but it's not put into practice. So, everybody in that sense is searching for how do I become a true person? How do I discover God? How do I approach closer to God? How do I become pleasing to God? This type of search, this type of desire, this type of longing is reality down all human history and all cultures. So again, using this very, very simple model, and I've already referred to it, so I don't need to spend too long on it.
Yeah.
It's really important to get the right relationship between thought and deed, or mind and body. So God created us as mind and body. What Father Moon's insight was, well, you know, we are made in the image of God. So actually, God has not you know, a physical appearance, but God has this interaction, this complementarity between thought and deed, in a sense. And when we bring our mind and body together in the centre, this is where we more completely resemble God, who is the harmonization of, you know, thought and deed, if you like. So, you know, in our thoughts, we need to be deeply connected to God, higher purpose, moral values. And then by our mind taking charge of our body and directing it towards those good purposes, then our mind can fulfill itself through the body. If we only had thoughts and we didn't have a body. One time I was living in Manchester for a while, with Patricia actually, as it happened, not you know, we were in the same activity together. And we made a resolution we would go for 40 days, bit sort of biblical type of feeling, to a place and we would serve other people. And one family I ended up staying with, the husband was paralyzed from the neck down.
Wow.
Couldn't even speak.
Wow.
He could only manipulate what was a very early computer system where he could move the muscles in his face and he could type something. So he didn't have a body.
Amazing.
And he had an amazing wife who got him, the hospital didn't want to let him out because they said if he died it would be their responsibility. But she fought and fought and fought and fought.
Let him out.
Because when he first got that machine, the first message he typed in the hospital was, "Get me out of here or let me die." Because he was in a little room with 4 walls and nothing.
No stimulation.
So he typed that out and she fought for months and months and months and finally got him released home. And when I got to know them and stayed with them, he had a beautiful room with a window, not like that window, but with a window with a beautiful view into the garden with birds and squirrels and nature and all sorts of lovely things there. So he must have loved his wife so much.
Oh,
But if he asked his body to give her a hug
can't.
or give her a kiss, his body doesn't do it. He can just type it out. "Thank you, darling." But he can't express it.
How sweet.
So the mind really needs the body, but the mind must take charge of the body. And in that relationship, the mind must be true to God and higher principles. And then where mind